Well, I'd like to say good morning, but I'm really not sure what's so good about it. Because this morning, we have to deal with the truth. And the truth is that we have a RICO problem. We have a problem with insurrection, rebellion, high crimes, and misdemeanors. This is the current reality in the United States and in many areas of the world. This is America, or at least it's supposed to be America. My name is Michael Crosby. I'm a candidate for the presidency of the United States. This morning I'd like to talk about some of the 18 mobile broadcast RB archives. Now, among these archives is one particular unit. We call that unit the Fishback. It's named after the previous owners. At one time, the records show that it belonged to the Fishbacks. Some people may have remembered George Fishback, the weatherman for KABC Los Angeles. He was a unique individual. He had incredible talent of explaining things in ways that some people either couldn't understand or it would just click in their head. He could explain things about showing the angles of the clouds in one direction and then explain the different ways that it looked in satellite. There was something about the way that George presented the weather and his education, the explaining of the original styles of real optical satellite imagery. He'd help you triangulate on the understanding and understand that the complex occurrences that were going on. To me, it's never quite been the same since they decided to just go to all digital and now everything is a nice Doppler situation. It's all recreated data. The original naturalism of natural optics have been removed. That apparently occurred back some time ago because basically somebody decided that terrorists somehow could be somehow using that optical data for their purposes. In many ways it was very sad because it marked the end of an era of an original blending between technology and the human factor of using your own eyes to interpret all of that optical data. Even though there was that integration, there was an integration at the beginning of the Doppler radar matching and explaining on how the layering, you could put it together and explain in different ways. And George Fishback was, in my view, the best weatherman in the history of the world. A unique individual, an individual who was also very much committed to helping other people and to involving himself in other nonprofit activities. So the vehicle was a perfect choice as an archive vehicle. Other items that are in the vehicle are going to be discussed as well. I'm going to take a short pause and I'll be right back. Among the Other items in the Fishback, with about 70,000 books. Among these books were poetry, books of rarities, books of popularity, books that were signed by the authors. We had books that were signed by the authors, original comic book creations from the teams that had created them, and interesting variances of history, so to speak. There were a lot of books, some books that pertain to womenist writing, many types of books, including women who had excelled in science, rocketry, books about women who had excelled in computing, early computing, the history of women working with the very early computers, the mechanical computers, and doing decoding for World War II. Incredible value of women participation in the course of our national security, so to speak. There were many other items also in the mobile archive in the Fishback. We had artifacts. There were some artifacts that were in the mobile archive. Now, I just tracking back a moment there. Many of the books, basically what was going to happen is they were going to be digitized. Some had already been digitized. They'd be digitized and then held into the main archival location, which we were seeking out where that location would be. But the mobile archives basically would be able to serve a rendition of the library, so to speak, wherever the mobile archive units would go, so that people would be able to access different types of material. But going back to the artifacts, among the artifacts in there, we have artifacts that were older than the Constitution of the United States. There were artifacts that were 900 years old. There were other artifacts that were many, many thousands of years old. But among them, there was an item, several items actually. They were kind of a unique history because the history behind them has an understanding of various people's faiths from the Americas. We had Incan artifacts, in which basically you have an item that is known as the Great American Seal, or actually the Great Seal of the Americas, is actually the translation into English as to that way. And among those was also the there was other items. There were different types of axes that were in the collection, of which we did not obtain the entire collection, but there was one particular axe that has a particular story because it's a particular event and particular purpose, and that was the crowning perfect axe, the one that was the ultimate piece of workmanship, that would be the proof to be basically be proof of and be presented to basically God, the God in the future, for the heavenly passage of the priest who had been protecting the interest and the rights, the exploration of basically ethics and things of knowing of high natures that would be necessary for protecting the people. A unique, interesting set of ideas. And some people didn't understand some of the Incan practices, like they had a practice of bloodletting, which was a discipline where they would cut themselves and bleed themselves. So as part of a sacrifice, as part of an action to basically show that they were willing and committed to faith, so to speak, to the ways of heavenly understanding for all time. So it's interesting because some of these processes appear in other faiths, other religions, and there's certain similarities on the symmetries that are quite interesting. But these artifacts, of course, were of a particular interest. The Great Seal of the Americas was a one-of-a-kind item. It was the only one of its type known to exist. Again, it's very old, older than the Constitution of the United States. Yet it's supposed to be protected by the Constitution of the United States. So I'll get into that in just a little bit. The practice of the archive was to basically be non-discriminative, to allow for all types of books and writings. There were religious books, very rare religious books, hundreds of years old. There were also various other types of books, people from all walks of life, poets, writers, books written by queens, duchesses, princesses. So that basically covers a significant portion of the contents of the Fishback. It also had a lot of solar panels that were temporarily stored in it because those were to be basically installed on the roof of the vehicle. All archive vehicles basically were in the process and at one level or another of having solar panels and stored on them so that they would be completely self-sufficient. We had several of the archive vehicles already equipped with panels, but it was a continuing process. The various situations involving the violent attacks upon the archive are of the deepest concern because we are in the process of filing more documentation respective to the attacks on the archive. So this is pretty bad. It's really, really bad when you have a situation where you have parties that are involved in attacks upon an archive, attacks upon the process of elections, attacks upon a candidate. These are considered acts of war, acts of rebellion. And the current situation deals with a situation where there's simply no choice. I mean, we have Julie Sue is a party that is an attacker. She's an attacker because she blacklisted the income recovery situation that Congress had ordered concerning participants. So these types of attacks are inexcusable, and her workings of what she did and the discovery of the $31 billion in fraud and the methodology to blacklist people who were citizens of California and owed money in lieu of a exchange of an open door policy for people to press a series of buttons saying that they could not prove their identity, that they were not American citizens, and that they had no proof, basically, of anything whatsoever, nothing to be verified, and that was just an open cash gateway setup, while people who were entitled were forced into a series of discriminations, a series of blacklistings, as parties would continuously spend, like myself. I used 3 phones in many instances, hours and hours and hours, and you can't get through. You eventually get through. We're talking about process weeks and months, trying to get through, and then you get through, and it's like, oh, well, there's no longer any more money for this fund area. And you call and you discover that if you press buttons a different way, that there's an express area. And it's like, oh, well, yeah, we still have money for this one area. So there was apparently always money available for non-citizens who had no proof of their identity. So this gateway stayed open constantly, even though those who were candidates, continuing participants in the process of elections, petitioners, many other types of people were all blacklisted. So this is Julie Sue, and the investigations have to proceed forward. There's so much more to go over and discover. Our investigations discovered so much more than what the Secret Service discovered and what the Senate investigations discovered. There's just so much more to it. And it's just vast. It's just so vast to look at the size of what one has to do to get a true, complete analysis of what happened. There's been many lawsuits filed, many lawsuits settled concerning the blacklisting. The situation also deals with the failure of Shirley Weber to address, request, and documents and demand for candidates to be assisted, respective to, records on hand, for instance, that were in control by the Secretary of State directly, that would prove petition gathering, certification, signatures. And this, of course, validates the evidence involving the Julie Sue situations. This is part of an interactive item, and then the demand for payment to be covered for ballot posting. As I was a gubernatorial candidate for the California recall special election, which had a separate section, the recall section of the governor, that was one separate issue. The just in case and selection of other gubernatorial candidates was another. So I was trying to activate my mobile campaign archives and get at least a dozen of them on the highways, on the roads, get them to where 1 million people a day could basically see my name, the website, would be able to run into them in different places where they could tap into Wi-Fi, which would have been a good thing. See, this is something that people could do. You could have the vehicles literally stop in parking lots, and people could tap right into the Wi-Fi and people could participate, and you could service people with petitions, where you could go out, and it would practically be like going to a place where you can have people come out on roller skates and personally bring petitions out to their vehicles, set up lines for people to sign up that way. But of course, the blacklisting and the financial attacks and whatnot brought all of this to a non-activation. So we had an entire convoy basically frozen, an entire fleet under attack, basically. So into this it goes even deeper, because there are other actions that concern the previous offices of Harris, in which basically there was discrimination, harassment on candidates, on archivers, concerning police officers that were found to be involved falsely in various write-ups that they had done, which were determined to be completely erroneous. And we had investigation from Arkansas, investigations from the IRS, investigation even from the FBI, where they sided with us. They looked at the information and says there's just absolutely no basis in fact whatsoever for what these officers have written up. There's no proof. Yet they demanded to keep moving them forward, and even though federal law states that when candidates contact the prosecutors of these items, that they have to accept any form of evidence. So when we turn over evidence of, by the way, there's a whole series of records involving the entire history and payment and all this other stuff involving the vehicles and all this other stuff, they just wouldn't cooperate, which of course is a felony. And the attack, writing erroneous information is a felony. Arkansas said that they would have no problem prosecuting the officer, but that they had problems with previous cases. They could not get California to extradite. So their situation was, we'll prosecute, but we guarantee right now that California won't cooperate. And what you'll have to do is you'll have to get an independent force to actually bring the officer in. You can file a case and put out a bond warrant, and somebody will usually pick up the bond warrant and arrest the parties in question and bring them in for prosecution. Bounty hunters, basically. But as these situations get more serious, since we now have 3 parties, there's actually more, but I'm mentioning there's way more. I'm actually mentioning 3 parties. So when we have 3 parties that are all cross-connected, Julie Sue, Harris, Shirley Weber, they're all cross-connected, and they're all participating in attacks upon a candidate and attacks upon archives. And again, the items such as the Great Seal of the Americas, this is older than the Constitution of the United States. These type of items are protected by the Constitution. To attack archives of this nature are punishable by death. So you have a multi-overlapping situation of the Constitution, and you have a clear RICO situation. So the horror of this situation and the seriousness that we have these 3 parties bringing great shame upon the Democratic Party. It's just such an event. To attack an archive is such an act of hatred. It's a crime against humanity to attack all of this archive information pertaining to the history of women in science and the triumph of women, and to attack all of these other items of archival importance, to destroy books. This kind of Nazi activity is inexcusable, and it just brings such shame upon the Democratic Party to have Harris and Weber and Julie Su involving themselves in such horrible constitutional violations and rebellious acts. As we have other parties also involved in a violent insurrection and in rebellion, where other parties attack the archives as well. This is an inexcusable situation, which of course leaves us no choice. We've already filed a series of documents on several different occasions, and we have to proceed forward again. And we have to try to ask once again, we're doing everything we can to get rational communications from the Democratic Party, rational communications from these various parties, and they're just not participating in it. And because you have a section where literally the head person in charge of protecting elections, Shirley Weber, is also a participant in blacklisting. She's a participant in dereliction of duty in protecting a candidate. And you have Harris, and you have the ongoing AG's office refusing to protect the process of elections, refusing to protect candidates. This is just inexcusable. So, there's a problem with who do you go to when ultimately the people who are supposed to be in charge of these various areas are the ones that are the perpetrators of the criminal activity. It's a very serious situation. It forces action from a higher order. Now, technically, the Constitution provides, the Constitution articles, that is, provide for certain types of additional ethical activity to occur. And that's the afforded ability for candidates to file the presidential candidate panels, so to speak. This is a situation that is just, it's a RICO. This is what people would call a RICO situation. So we're going to have to file RICO and seize all of the assets of these parties involved. That means seizure of the general fund of the Democratic Party, because they have not involved themselves in rational conduct. They refuse to involve themselves in rational communications. And the American people have to see this. The voters have to see this. The voters of California have been cheated, not just have been cheated in previous elections. Certainly, the item of great notice is the gubernatorial recall election, where the estimates, the analyst estimates involving what should have occurred because of the total number of mobile campaign archive vehicles being basically on crowded freeways in places such as Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego, Orange County. The estimate, just 12 vehicles, that would have been 1 million people a day driving down the road and seeing these dozen archive vehicles, seeing the candidate's name, the websites, getting that introduction into a brand new system of open options for the election process, a brand new set of AI-enhanced tooling for being able to do things with computers and get a hold of services. We were setting up to do 24/7 services, which were to be expanded upon success in elections. And of course, as a continuing candidate, as a continuing presidential candidate, the situation deals with, again, these parties are attacking the entire concept of 24/7 services to be activated in their fullness. This is a horrible crime against humanity of what these people are perpetrating, what they've involved themselves in. And again, these are described by the Constitution of the United States as acts of war and attacks upon archive and horrible rebellious labeling. Death penalty. The punishment is death penalty in these areas. And this is part of our history for the next 100 years, whatever we call books that children will read for the next 100 years, recorded for all time, this horrible cycle, this horrible period. Even though, as it is right now, the media hasn't been covering this horrible series of crimes against humanity, this horrible series of crimes against women, this horrible series of crimes against archiving and books, against the concepts of ethics and freedom. It's just mind-boggling how things have proceeded to the point where we have to end up saying, that we have no choice but to proceed forward with further actions that are stronger, in which basically we have no choice but to put forth the constitutional mandated charges and have these parties facing the death penalty for what they've done, for their rebellion and insurrectionist behavior. So I'm going to close off and end with showing another image of an artifact that is older than the Constitution of the United States. It's a one-of-a-kind artifact. And again, this artifact is protected by the Constitution and articles, and parties who would attack such archiving and such artifacts, there's a mandatory death penalty for parties who would attack such history. It is truly a crime against humanity that cannot be allowed. I'd like to thank you this morning for your time. Again, my name is Michael Crosby. I'm a presidential candidate for 2024. I identify myself as Democrat. I've been trying to get my papers filed properly, but again, I've been blacklisted by these parties who are refusing to cooperate with the Constitution of the United States and the laws of the United States. I thank the voters. I thank the people. Have a good morning, if that makes any sense at all.